Welcome back. This is Bio 1221, and we're going to our third installment of our Introduction to Anatomy and Physiology. Some really simple concepts we want to talk about in this little video, but are really important. They're simple but important. And what we want to talk about is body planes and abdominal quadrants and regions, okay? And that's what we're going to be talking about over the next few minutes here. First of all, what in the world are body planes? Okay, body planes are sort of geometric planes that divide the body into sections that are used to be able to assist in describing directions of things, in describing positions of one thing in relationship to something else, and locations of various body structures. And what they're created like in XYZ graph. Okay, if you're familiar with, if you like math and you've done graphing, you know you have an X and a Y axis, but now we're going to add a Z axis as well to that. And what these planes do is they equally divide the body into a right and a left side. They divide the body into a front and a back side, and they divide the body into a top and a bottom side, and all through a center area, which is sort of like that single center point. So basically, these anatomical body planes are there to assist in identifying the position of various things in the body. And we'll be talking about where things are and how things relate to a certain plane. It also has a significance which is even more important than that radiographically, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. And what happens is the body has what we call three cardinal planes. And these three cardinal planes one of them is called the mid-sagittal or sagittal plane. Another one's called the frontal plane, and another one's called the transverse plane. They're all perpendicular to each other, and they'll sort of help to, again, decide or define where things are in relationship of one thing to another, or a location of a particular structure within the body. So let's talk about this a little bit more. Let's look at this. Now, this is an image of a person, okay, and what we have is divided by three major planes. These are called cardinal planes. The thing about cardinal planes is, number one, they are all perpendicular to each other. They're all perpendicular to each other. So when we look at one plane, it's perpendicular to another plane, which is perpendicular to the third plane. So we have three cardinal planes. The first cardinal plane we'll talk about is called the mid-sagittal or sagittal plane. Both words are appropriate for that. The second plane we're going to talk about is the frontal. There's another word for frontal. Sometimes you'll also see it's called the coronal plane. I'll have that a little bit. And then a third plane is called the transverse plane. And the transverse plane is also called the axial plane. There are other planes that we could have in the body. If you look at this one down here is called an oblique plane because it's not on any of those three cardinal planes. If a plane is parallel to a cardinal plane, it's called para. Okay, it's called para. So a paraplane would be like a parasagittal would be a plane that would be parallel to the sagittal plane. Why? Because what happens is if I look at the body, we could divide the body. All those three planes come together, and they come together in one central spot in the center of the body, and all these planes are perpendicular to each other. So if I'm looking at one plane, it'll be on one axis. If I look at another plane, it comes through, and they all meet at the center area right there in the middle of the body. Therefore, each of the three planes are perpendicular to each other. Each of the three planes are perpendicular to each other. And I think that's an important factor to remember. So let's look at those planes individually and try to find which each of them is. Let's first of all look at this sagittal or mid-sagittal plane, okay? And that's this plane we have right here. We can see it. It's right here. Oops, it goes through there. It comes back like that. That's that plane. Divides sort of like the body into a right and a left side. Okay, so we can see our mid-sagittal plane. This is also sometimes you'll see the word midline. Midline just refers to a line that would come down right through the middle of the body, which would divide right and left side. A lot of things to the right of the midline, to the left of the midline. That midline is that middle line goes down through the body. Okay, and again, this is called the sagittal or mid-sagittal plane, and divides the body into roughly equal right and left halves. Okay, now obviously we're not totally symmetrical. One side might be a little bit bigger than the other side, might be a little longer, whatever the case may be, but this basically does say that, you know, it's essentially you know, dividing the body into equal sides. And again, what happens is it all meets at that central point somewhere down in there where all those three planes come together. So all the other two planes will be perpendicular to the sagittal or mid-sagittal plane. Okay, so that's called the sagittal or mid-sagittal plane. Goes from front to back, divides the body into a right side, so it divides the body into right side and a left side, right down the middle of the body. And that middle portion of the body would be called the midline. Okay, that should be easy to remember. The second plane we have is called the frontal plane. Okay, and here's the frontal plane. Now the frontal plane is going this way, this way, this way, this way, and it's dividing the body into a front, and a back. Okay, so now we have a front and the back. Okay, through this frontal plane. Okay, this frontal plane is also called the coronal plane. So if you do see the word coronal also means that frontal plane. It divides the body into a front half and a back half. Now, obviously, there's a lot that's different on the front than on the back, and the structures are a little bit different in the front than the back, you know. But on the other hand, what happens is basically it still meets at that mystical area that's right here down in the middle. That little area is called the center of gravity, or the center of mass, which is right sort of like located in the pelvis, where all these three planes come to a single point. If I was to draw an X, Y, Z graph, you know, and draw that, so I have a x-axis, a y-axis, that z-axis would be coming out like perpendicular from that, straight out from the screen, and that's where they're all perpendicular to each other as well. So all these planes are perpendicular to each other. So now we know what the sagittal plane is, divides a right and a left, and we now know what a frontal plane is, which divides the body into a front and a back. Okay, so that's the frontal plane, also called the coronal plane. So again, if you see coronal plane, it means the same as the frontal plane. The third plane we have is called the transverse plane, okay? And that transverse plane is this plane right here that divides the body into an upside and a bottom side, okay? So, an upper and a lower part of the body. Again, not totally symmetrical, because there's things different on the top as compared to things around the bottom. Also, one other thing I should mention about the transverse plane, it's also sometimes called the axial plane. So if you see axial plane or transverse plane, they both mean the same. Okay? So these are my three cardinal planes, and they all meet parallel to each other. Perpendicular to each other. So my frontal plane will divide the body into a front side and a back side. My sagittal plane divides the body into a right side and a left side, and my transverse plane divides the body into an upper half and a bottom half. Okay, and those are the three cardinal planes. Again, some planes are not on those planes, or some cuts are not on those planes, and those would be called oblique. And if we have a plane that's parallel to, it's called a parasagittal plane. Now, you're saying, big deal, whoopee-doo, you know, what's the big deal about planes? Well, it's really important, okay, because radiographic orientation is based upon planes and plane orientation, okay? What happens is the plane that you take something is decided by the image that you get, okay, or the image that you want is going to be decided by the plane that this image is going to be on. What I mean is that if we cut the body in a particular plane, you'd view the body in that particular plane. Now, that's sort of hard to put into words, but let me use these two diagrams up here to show a little bit about what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's a body. Okay, here's a body. Let's say we're taking an X-ray of this person, and we make that cut like this, so we're cutting them into the front and the back. So actually what we're doing is, if I was to take the body and cut it down there and remove the front half, I would see the heart sitting in there, there would be a heart sitting in there, there'd be some lungs sitting in there, sitting on the top, the trachea and stuff like that would be sitting there, and I would see those things, okay? Because what happens is, I cut the body on that plane, on that frontal plane or that coronal plane. If I would remove the front, I'd see that the body, how it would be at that particular slice. What's my viewing point? It'd be perpendicular to it. This little line would be it's sort of a sagittal axis. That axis that I'm viewing that X-ray would be on the sagittal plane, but I'm looking at a frontal plane image. Okay? Let me give you another example. Now let's say I have what's called a sagittal plane image. Okay, here's the sagittal plane right here. So we cut the body, and I cut the body into a right and a left half. And if I took this part away and just erased this part that's on the outside, the part that's not blue back there, and I saw the rest of the body, I'd see that would be a sagittal plane image. But what I'm viewing it from a transverse axis coming from the side. Okay, so that's how we look at X-rays. And I'll show you some examples of some X-rays that help you to identify that a little bit better. So again, just to go over this again so that you'll know when we look at these X-rays, if I get a frontal plane view or a frontal plane image, I'm like cutting out everything in front. I'm just seeing the body in that direction. Why? Because I'm seeing my point of view, or my vision is perpendicular to that plane. Okay, so if that plane was here, I'd be looking at it, my eye would be out here looking this way at it perpendicular. Okay, so this would be the cut. So if that cut was on the frontal plane, that cut would be right there. I'd be looking at it perpendicular by a sagittal plane axis, or sagittal axis. Okay, let's look at what we're about. Okay, let me give you some radiographic examples here. Okay, this is a knee. It's called an AP knee. Okay, it's on the frontal plane, so therefore it has a sagittal plane axis. Now here's what I want you to do. Okay, now you can see this knee. You can see here's the fibula right here. If you don't know much anatomy, here's the fibula. That's on the lateral side of the leg. Here's the tibia coming down here. We'll talk about those. You'll know those real soon. Here's the femur. Come right here. Here's the patella sitting right here, the kneecap. So it's like if you took your leg and you sliced it with, you took off the front half of your lower leg, and what you did is then you saw the bones and everything from if you took off the front half of the lower leg. What am I viewing for it? Here's what I want you to do. Take a pencil now and put a pencil perpendicular to the computer screen, and that would be the way you're viewing it. You're viewing it at a 90-degree angle as you're looking at this view right now. So the plane is cut from front, like a front, and divides the front and back, and that's what we call a frontal plane, but it's viewed on a sagittal plane axis. Why? Because sagittal would be in this direction, looking straight back along that line, and that's the way I'm viewing that. Okay, this is actually what we call a lateral knee. Okay, and this is actually is looking at the image on a sagittal plane, which is the transverse plane axis. Okay, now think about those planes. Okay, you might have to watch this a couple times to be able to get this straight, but here's the femur again. Okay, here's the femur. Okay, here's the patella sitting right there, so that's that. Here's the tibia, here's the fibula sitting right there. Okay, but I'm looking at it in a different orientation. I'm looking at from the side, so therefore if I'm looking at from the side, I'm catching somebody on a sagittal plane. I'm looking at them from a sagittal plane. Again, remember that sagittal plane divides right to left. So that plane comes from front to back this way. So people are looking at it this way. So they're actually seeing the leg coming from the side. Okay? So therefore, it's a sagittal plane image, or what we call a lateral knee, which is basically on a transverse plane axis, that you're looking at the knee that way. Okay, so that just gives you a little idea, and you might have to look that again just to try to get it straight. But you know, if something is looking, if we're looking at the body from the front to the back, it's catching somebody on a frontal plane, and therefore the axis is coming this way, is a sagittal plane axis. If I'm looking at somebody from the side, which is called a lateral view, we're viewing them on a sagittal plane, but it's coming in along that transverse plane axis. Okay, so just look at the axes and they'll make sense. If you look at it a couple times, or 5 or 6 or 20 or 10,000 times, you'll probably get it by 10,000. You should, okay, at least by 10,000. You know, so if an image is taken on the frontal or coronal plane, it's called an AP or a PA. Now, what do I mean by AP or PA? If I look at this word AP, PA, what that means radiographically is the direction of the X-ray beam, how that X-ray is coming and hitting, which is basically the way you're seeing it as well. So in other words, if I'm looking at a frontal plane image, okay, because the frontal plane would be cutting me this way, okay, I'm looking from either anterior to posterior. Anterior means in front, posterior means behind, or posterior from behind to anterior, because I'm viewing somebody on this frontal plane. If the image is taken on the sagittal plane, it's called a lateral view because it's coming in from the side. Okay, and so we describe the X-ray by AP, PA, or lateral by the direction of the beam. Where is it coming from? In this case, it's coming from lateral. In this case, it's coming from the front and going towards the back. In this case, it's coming from the back and going towards the front. Okay, and that's the way an X-ray beam is described. Okay, I know when I'd order an X-ray, I'd want an AP or a PA, or I want a lateral view of something. I have to actually tell them so they know exactly which way the beam they want to project at that particular bone to take that image. Okay, so the view is defined by the direction of the radiographic beam, which is actually perpendicular to the plane on which the image is taken. Okay, hopefully you've been able to follow that. So in other words, if the image is taken on the frontal or coronal plane, which is again dividing front to back. You take off that whole front and you see what, and then it leaves what you see, okay? And if the beam is perpendicular to that, it's going from an anterior to posterior direction, or if it's coming from the back, it would be from a posterior to anterior direction. If you're doing something on the sagittal plane, they cut me this way, then the views come, or then the beam is coming from the lateral view, from the lateral side, so it's called a lateral view. Okay, so that's just describing the direction of the beam. I'll discuss this a little bit more during the class, but that's what that's about. Okay, let's look at this. Now this, would be a little bit more. This would be a coronal or frontal plane image. Okay, if you look right here, you can see the body. It's almost like they took the body and sliced off the whole front and took it away. So therefore, they cut that the plane would be on the frontal plane, dividing the front to back. I'm seeing what's left after I take that front half off. That's what I'm seeing there, and you can see right there, it'd be that type of plane. This one right here. This is obviously a cadaver head that was sectioned. What plane is this on? I'm going to let you think about this. What plane is this on? Guess. Think about it. Write about it. See if you can see. I'm cutting like this. What plane would it be? That's a hint. Oh, that's a hint. I shouldn't have given that hint. What's that plane that would be on? Actually, what you see here, this is interesting because here's the tongue. Here's the tongue right here. This is part of the brain. This is part of the brain stem right here. Here's the vertebrae. Here's where the spinal cord is going to be coming down. This is the nasal cavity in here. Okay. This would be the skull up in here. Here's the back of the neck. Here's the jaw. You can see the teeth in there. There's the upper lip, lower lip. Here's the end of the nose. Here's the So here's the back of the throat right here, or the throat inside there. Here's the back of the throat right there. Trachea would be coming down this way. Okay, so what plane? Now I give you a chance to look at what plane. What plane is this? And hopefully you got this right. Obviously, it's a sagittal plane. It's kind of the sagittal plane. Oh, should I have gone back? I can't go back. It would be on the sagittal plane. Okay. What about these three planes? Let's look at these. Now this is just a bigger image of the body. What plane are each of these on? Take a guess. So the last one was on a sagittal plane. What do we have here? Okay, let's take a guess. Think about it. What do you have? Write it down. Write it down. Okay, let's see if you're right. How about the one on the left? What do you think? Yell it out. Go ahead. Yell. That's sagittal plane, because we just saw it on the last image. There's the same image. There's the head right there. There's the brain and stuff like that. So we know that's a sagittal plane. What about this one right here? What about that one? Take a guess. Obviously, that's the frontal plane. That's the frontal plane right there. Why? Cutting this way, front to back. Okay? And that's what we see. Guess what this one is? Now that should be really hard. Let's see. Sagittal, frontal, what's left? Okay? This is where they've actually taken the skull and cut it this way. What do we see here? There's an eyeball right there. There's an eyeball right there. Here's the brain, obviously, in here. Nasal cavity sitting in there. So what view? What plane is that cut on? That's obviously the axial or transverse plane. Okay. So sagittal plane. Let's get that arrow in there. Sagittal plane. Okay. Sometimes called mid-sagittal. That's fine. Frontal plane, or also called coronal plane. And axial plane, also called transverse plane. Okay. Now let's take another example. Okay. PA chest, lateral chest. What planes are these views on? Think about it. Go ahead, think about it. I'll give you a second. Think about it. Well, this should be relatively simple because we've talked about it so many times before. Who said the one on the left was the frontal plane? Had to be. Cutting the body this way, front to back, and that's what we see. If I cut off the front, that's what you see. What do you see here? Here's the heart. Here's the heart right there. You see a little bit of the heart. You see the trachea right there. Here's a clavicle, a collarbone right there. Clavicle is part of the scapula up in there. These are all ribs here. This right here is the aorta. You can see the aorta. This is all the pulmonary vessels on that side. You see the vertebrae coming down the back, and that's what we see there. So that's obviously on the frontal plane. Obviously a frontal plane chest x-ray, okay, or a PA chest. Interesting thing about PA chest, okay, most chest x-rays are called PA chest. PA, what does PA mean? Posterior to anterior. What does posterior mean? Back. Anterior means front. Most of them, the beam goes from back to front. I'll the back to the front. If you ever had a chest x-ray taken, they stick you against the little plate, put your hands up to the side or to the side, and they tell you take a deep breath. That gets the scapula out of the way. Take a deep breath. You take a deep breath, hold it, you hold it, and all of a sudden you hear the machine go, and all of a sudden it goes off, and you say, okay, you can take a deep breath, okay? Or you can relax, and you go ahead and breathe. What happens is they take it from posterior to anterior because of what I see on this other one, which is that lateral chest, okay? And that lateral chest, we know, would also be called a sagittal, on the sagittal plane. They call it a PHS because this thing right here is the heart, okay? Here's the aorta. You can see the aorta sort of swinging over the top. This is the heart. This is anterior. This is posterior back here. So the idea is, think about this. The X-ray film would be up in here. The X-ray film would be here, okay? And we're viewing it from from the side, okay? Excuse me. The X-ray film would be here in an AP view, not in a lateral. In a lateral view, it's going to be on the other side. But in this PA view, the film is going to be along the front portion of the chest, right there. Okay, so not in this lateral view, but in a PA chest. I put the film in the front of the chest, right here. And the reason why they put the film in the front of the chest is because the heart is closer to the film. Okay, the film or the plate. And therefore, the further something is away from the plate, the more it gets magnified because that beam starts to spread out a bit. Okay, so if they want to get an accurate heart size, the things they want the most appropriate size for, they want closest to the film. Okay, so not in the lateral, but in the PA chest, they would take the film and put it against. That's why you lean against that film or that plate, because they get that plate close to the heart, because here is the heart, close to where that plate would be right in here. Therefore, there's less magnification. So that's why chests are usually PA chests as compared to AP chests. Sometimes in the emergency room, they get what's called a portable chest. They bring the machine down and they stick the plate behind them underneath their back. Why? Because these people are sick. They can't stand up. They can't do anything. And they take a picture. However, it distorts the size of the heart. The heart's going to look bigger than what it otherwise would be. So on a PA chest, the film would be here. Okay, and the X-ray is coming from this direction through to the chest, so that the heart doesn't get magnified. If they did it from this section and they put the plate here, the heart would look bigger than what it actually would be on the film. Okay, hopefully you'll understand that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in class. Okay, what plane is this on? This is a CT scan of the abdomen. CT scans are radiographs as well, but they're taken in slices. There's the hint. Hint, that's anterior or ventral. Ventral is the word for in front, and posterior or dorsal. What plane is that on? Think about that. Now I know that there's anterior and posterior, and this would be obviously right, and this would be left. Okay? Actually, it's not. This is actually right, and this is left. Okay, this is right side and left. They're looking at it from the bottom. Actually, I'm sorry. So this over here would be the right side, and this would be the left. Okay, because it's looking at it from the bottom up. So what plane would that be on? I've given you a little chance to think about it. What plane would that be on? Hopefully you got this right. It's on the axial transverse plane, okay, because it's cutting the body into a top and a bottom section, and that's what we see with that particular plane. Okay, what's wrong with this X-ray? Let me give you a chance to look at this. I want you to tell me what's wrong with this X-ray. Okay, what's wrong with this? Look at it. Look at the whole thing, and let's see how quick you are here. Let me see. What's wrong with this X-ray? Well, obviously, you know, the bone is wrong. I mean, there was an old fracture here that went to what's called a malunion. It's not united. There's also a fibular fracture right there. It's the fibular fracture. So the bone didn't unite in quite the direction it should have. But hey, you know, that's not what I was talking about. I actually see there's a little area that might even still be a little open on the bone there. What's really wrong with this X-ray? And this was actually, I got this from a journal. I found this in a journal, and I want to write to them and say, what are you guys doing? I mean, you're not smarter than a third grader. You know, what's wrong with this? Easy. Let me give you a hint. What's wrong? That's the lateral view. That's the anterior posterior view. The guy they actually, on a journal that was printed, nobody picked this up that they had him labeled wrong. This is an anterior posterior coming. Again, we're looking at from front to back, and this is from the side, which is a lateral view. I could not believe it when I saw this. I said, what kind of idiots wrote that article? I mean, a bunch of morons, I guess. Okay. Anyway, that's a little bit. That's what's wrong with that X-ray. Okay. The images are labeled incorrectly, as we say, and this is inconceivable. If you're a Princess Bride fan, you know what we're talking about. Okay, inconceivable. So anyway, so that's what's wrong with that X-ray. It's labeled wrong. Okay, and that should never be done. Okay, I hope you understand a little bit about those planes. You might have to go over it a couple times. It's really not that difficult to figure out, but it's not bad. Okay, what I want to talk now about are what are called abdominopelvic quadrants. Okay, quad means four. So what happens is sometimes, what we use planes to be able to identify locations and positions of things. We could also use and sort of like an arbitrary division of the abdomen to decide where these abdominal organs are. When we get to the abdominal section, the abdomen is jam-packed with all kinds of different organs. Okay, lots of different things in there, and as a result, what happens is we try to identify where they are by location. Well, one way we could do this is by what we call quadrants. Okay, and we actually take the abdomen and divide it into fours. And we're talking about this. What happens is when we divide it into quadrants, what we do is we draw a vertical line this way and a horizontal line. Well, what do we know what to do, how to draw those lines? The first line we do, let's talk about the vertical line. Let's talk about this one first. Just below the, whoops, I keep on doing that. Just below the, where the ribs come together in the front. If you take your hands and you feel right where the ribs come together in the front, there's a little point that sticks right down there. And that's the bottom part of the sternum called the xiphoid. Now, if you take that tip of the xiphoid, okay, and you run an imaginary line straight down and through the navel, which is called the umbilicus or umbilicus, and pass it straight down, it comes together where the pelvis meets together right down here, which is called the pubic symphysis. So that vertical line runs from the xiphoid through the umbilicus or the belly button or the navel or whatever you want to call it. Fuzzy, I don't care. It goes through that thing right there. Oh, I don't care now. I'll care later on. Okay. What happens is it runs that vertical line straight down through that way. Okay. Then that horizontal line is much simpler. All I do is make a perpendicular line to that vertical line right through the fuzzy, whatever you want to call it, that umbilicus. Okay, goes right through that. So now all of a sudden I have quadrants, and this one up here is called the right upper quadrant. There's the left upper quadrant. That's bad. Left lower quadrant and right lower quadrant. Okay, so we can divide those. Now, what's the importance and what's the significance of that? Let me get rid of those words and those lines and stuff like that. What's the significance of that? Well, I know that what happens in a normally appearing abdomen, there are certain things that sit in certain quadrants. Okay, and where they should be. Let's look at a couple of these things. Let's look at the stomach. Here's the stomach right here. I don't want to do that big line. Here's the stomach that sits right here. It sits right in there. Okay, let's look. Here's the liver. Sits right there. They do it green. There's the gallbladder sitting right down there. Here's the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon is going to be here. Oops, the appendix sits right down in here. So basically, sometimes somebody will have a complaint, and what you might see is somebody gets sent down to the radiographic department or the X-ray department, and they say the chief complaint, CC, pain, right lower quadrant. Okay, so therefore, this is the area of concern, the right lower quadrant. What's down there? A big thing, the appendix, okay, as well as a couple other structures that are down there, okay? So in other words, when you take an X-ray, you want to make sure that when that X-ray is obtained, that this area is nice and clear and you can see everything you need to see before you send it back, okay? So this is just looking at dividing the abdomen into quadrants, okay, with a vertical line from the xiphoid through the umbilicus to the area of the pubic symphysis, and a horizontal line straight through the umbilicus this way. So we have a vertical line, horizontal, so we divide 1 quadrant, 2 quadrants, 3 quadrants, we satisfy our 4 quadrants. Right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, left lower quadrant, right lower quadrant, and anatomically things reside in there. Most of my stomach is going to be in my area of my left upper quadrant. Most of my liver is going to be in my right upper quadrant. The gallbladder is going to be in the right upper quadrant. So somebody will have a complaint in the right upper quadrant, and that's where you might want to look. Okay, and that's just looking at abdominal pelvic quadrants. Okay, it's dividing the abdomen into 4 basic general regions in which things may happen. Okay, and that's an interesting thing. You know, and it's just, let's look. Oh, this is good. Okay, what we have here is we have a cadaver. Okay, so let's look at the cadaver, and let's divide this cadaver into quadrants. Okay, there's my vertical line, because right here you might see the little tab of the xiphoid would be right there. Get out of there. And then down here would be the area of the pubis, and the umbilicus is going to be somewhere around in this area, right in there. Okay, so, and then let's draw my horizontal line. Let's draw my horizontal. Do it. There we go. There's my horizontal line. So now I have my right upper quadrant, my right upper quadrant. I have my left upper quadrant, my left lower quadrant, and my right lower quadrant. So what do we see here? Let's look. Okay, and my right upper quadrant, guess what this thing is? That's the liver. That's the liver. Get a little tab of liver right here, but the biggest lobe of the liver, the right lobe of the liver, is this area right here. What's that? That's the stinking gallbladder. Okay, that's a big thing right there. Stomach is right here, which is mostly in my left upper quadrant. Okay, if I look down here, what's that? That's the appendix sitting right down in there. This is the rest of the intestines, and so we actually see part of this right here is called the cecum, the lower portion of the large intestine, which is coming up here. This is the transverse colon right here, and the descending colon is going to be coming down that way. So basically, these quadrants help me to identify where things are anatomically and structurally, and which is basically what our discussion was today in this particular video anyway. Okay, those are quadrants. Right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, left lower quadrant. Piece of cake, easy. That should be easy. You know, nobody should ever forget that. Let's look at a radiograph, okay? And let's take this abdomen. This is called a flat plate of the abdomen, okay? And let's divide this. There's my vertical line from the xiphoid to the pubic symphysis. You can't see it really well, but you can see a little bit down here, okay? It's right down at the bottom, right here. You actually see, in fact, if you go back and watch, before I made that line, you actually see a little gap right there, and that's the area where the right side of the pelvis meets the left side of the pelvis, and there's a little chunk of cartilage that holds the two together. So that's my vertical line, okay, through the xiphoid umbilicus to the pubic symphysis, and there's my horizontal line. So basically, if I look up at here, all these little areas like there, you know what those are? That's all gas in the intestine. Okay, that's all gas. See, the liver is going to sit right up there next to you. It's sort of like more homogeneous up there. That's going to be the liver, but I can't see anything else that's really there. Okay, so that's how they would look at an abdominal X-ray, looking at quadrants. Okay, piece of cake, easy. What happens is, you know what? I'm a Virgo, and 4 isn't enough. I need to have it a little bit more specified. I need a little bit more definition. So what happens is they could also divide the abdomen to what they call abdominopelvic regions. Abdominopelvic regions. And basically, this is dividing the abdomen into 9s. Okay, so let's get a picture over there of what we're talking about. What we divided the abdomen into 9 regions, sort of like a tic-tac-toe board. Okay, and so I could make 2 vertical lines, a vertical line here and a vertical line here. And I could make 2 horizontal lines, horizontal line here and a horizontal line here. Well, what defines these lines? Okay, well, this line right here, my purple line, okay, is called the mid-clavicular line. Called the mid-clavicular line because the clavicle sits up in here, somewhere in the middle of the clavicle. Okay, in the middle of the clavicle, so that'd be the mid-clavicular line. And you draw a straight vertical line right down from the middle of the clavicle, straight on down. Okay, that'd be the mid-clavicular line. My next 2 lines are a little bit less sure, okay? This one right here, okay, this one up at the top is called the horizontal subcostal line. Sub means below, costo means rib. So where the bottom of the ribs are, if you feel the sides, you feel where the ribs are at the side. I take where the ribs, the lowest portion of the ribs on the right side and the lowest portion of the ribs on the left side and make a line straight across there. And that's my horizontal subcostal line. Okay, This line down here is a little bit more difficult to figure out, okay? And this down here is called the transtubercular line, okay? Trans means across. Tubercle means a bump on a bone, and that's going to be coming up pretty soon, okay? Now, tonight, in the privacy of your own home, okay, don't do this on the street or in front of your neighbors or friends, but if you feel your pelvis, the front of the pelvis, on the front, okay, right in here, oh, that looks bad, okay? Anyway, right in here, you'll feel a little bump coming out of the front of the pelvis, okay? And that's called the anterior, let me write this down, anterior superior iliac spine, or it's something called the ASIS, okay? Anterior superior iliac spine. What you do is you draw a line going from one anterior superior iliac spine over to the other one. And what that does, it creates, it's like a tic-tac-toe board. You know, you could actually sit here and, you know, with your friends, okay, and you could, you know, do whatever you want and, you know, and make your tic-tac-toe. But let's look at this. Now we have these lines, okay, these number of lines that are there. Let's look at what we have to do with that, okay, and how they've divided the abdomen. Let me get rid of all this garbage here, okay. What divides is it divides the abdomen into 9 regions, okay. What happens is, let's look and let's name these. First of all, we have the right and left hypochondriac. Hypo means below. Chondr means, oh, it looks bad, okay. Chondr means cartilage, okay. And what happens is the ribs, and we're going to find this out later on when we talk about the chest and when we talk about breathing, where the ribs actually stop at a certain point and they become cartilage as they go towards the sternum or the breastbone, okay. So the lower portion of the ribs attached to the lower ribs actually attach to the rib above. They don't attach directly to the sternum, but they're attached to the ribs above, and they're attached by cartilage, so they're able to move a little bit. So since this is on the right side, first of all, and it's below the cartilage of the ribs, it's called the right hypochondriac region, okay? Left side is really simple. It's called the left hypochondriac region because it's on the left side, first of all, okay? And it's below the cartilage of the ribs, below hypocartilage chondriac, okay? In the middle, right here, this middle portion is called the epigastric region. Now, if you're taking medical terminology, epi means upon, gastric means stomach. So what sits right in there? That's the stomach. Stomach sits right in here. So that's upon the stomach. A lot of people, when they have an ulcer, they'll have epigastric pain, okay? And the pain would be right here in the pit of the stomach, just below the xiphoid, right where it comes to a peak there. Right in there, that would be the epigastric region, okay? So those, now we've named 3, right and left hypochondriac, right hypochondriac, left hypochondriac, epigastric, okay? And let's get rid of those. Let's get rid of all those so we can see what's the next line. Whoops. The next line we have is the right and left lumbar regions, okay? So we've gone through hypochondriac and epigastric, lumbar. So here's a right lumbar region, and here's a left. Now, the easy things to remember are left and right, okay? Hopefully you know that, okay? If not, write a little L and R on your shoe, okay? Well, what happens is right and left. Lumbar region is the lower back region, okay? And the vertebrae we'll talk about later on are called the lumbar vertebrae in the lower back region. Because it's right in the lumbar region, it's called the right lumbar region. If it's left, it's called left lumbar region. Perfect, okay? So now we've gotten that. The part in the middle now, right here, the biggest thing that we have, the anatomical landmark, is that umbilicus, or that belly button, or that navel, or fuzzy, or whatever you want to call it, okay? So that's the umbilical region. So the center portion we call umbilical. So now I have right lumbar, umbilical, and left lumbar region, okay? I'm good. I have 6 so far. Let's get rid of those. Let's get rid of that stuff. Let's get rid of all that, erase all that stuff on my screen. Let's go down and further, and we'll go down to the next portion, which is called the right inguinal or iliac region. Again, right because it's right, left because it's left. Inguinal or iliac, inguinal or iliac. This portion of the pelvis right here is called the ilium. This wing, this large wing that you could feel, that big crest on both sides of the hip, is called the iliac crest. So this area of the pelvis is called the ilium. So this is called the iliac region, left iliac region, right iliac region. It's also called the inguinal region. It's called the inguinal region. And the reason why it's called the inguinal region is because in the lower portion of the abdomen, right down in, let me just draw it with a different color. Let me draw it with a blue. Right down in here, okay, and right down in here, there's a canal in the lower abdominal wall of males, okay? Not females, in males. And it's called the inguinal canal, the inguinal canal. And it comes on both sides. When guys, you've known if they've checked you for a hernia, what they do is they take their finger, put it up by the scrotum, and stick it up along your anterior abdominal wall and say cough, sneeze, strain, push down, whatever the case may be, and they're feeling for a bulge. Because what happens is there's actually a hole, there's really a tunnel that goes from superficial here to deep here inside, and goes inside the abdominal wall. Okay, what happens is in males, the testes start out inside the abdominal cavity, just like the ovaries in females. And with time, during gestation, which is the time that the kid is confined in the uterus, what happens is that testicles, the testes, will work their way down through that inguinal canal, and they finally end up down in that scrotum or that skin sac that's between the legs. Okay, and that's called the inguinal canal. So this region right here, anatomically, is also called the inguinal region or the inguinal triangle. Okay, so therefore, when I look at that area, it's called the right inguinal or right iliac region, and the left inguinal or left iliac region, which only leaves me one more, and that's the one here in the middle. That one here in the middle is called the hypogastric. Hypo means less than or lower. Well, if this is the gastric region, this is a lot lower than the gastric region, so they call it the hypogastric region, or the pubic region, because this is again the area where the pelvic bones comes together, and you can actually see it here. I'll draw it here in a smaller. If you see right here, here's the pelvis right here. It comes this way, it comes this way, and it comes down this way. This is called the ischium down in here. This is the pubis right here, and it comes this way, down this way. Whoop, get out of there. Okay, and across there, then right down there, and it's open right there. It's open right there, and right in the center, right here, is that chunk of cartilage, which is called the pubic symphysis. So this is where the pubic bone comes together, where one side of the pelvis comes and meets the other, and that's the pubic bone that comes together. So therefore, it's also called the hypogastric or pubic region. Hypogastric or pubic region. Why do we have these regions? Exactly the same reason why we had the quadrants, but much more precise. In other words, instead of having a large area, it limits that area a little bit more. It makes the grid smaller. Okay, so we can be a little bit more precise. So again, my right hypochondriac region, my left hypochondriac region. Up here, you're going to see the liver and stuff like that. My epigastric, you're going to see the epigastric region going to be in here. Stomach and liver right in here. Umbilical region, sort of like the center. Here's the transverse colon and things like that. A lot of small intestine. My left lumbar region might be something in the back. Might also be descending colon here, ascending colon over here. My right inguinal or iliac region. Again, here's the appendix sitting right there. Ooh, it sits right there. Let me get rid of that so you can see it. We don't want you to miss the appendix. See that little wormy thing right there? That's the appendix, right at the almost like at the junction. Hypogastric. My bladder. The bladder actually sits down in here. So if we think of what's down in this hypogastric area, the bladder actually sits right here, right behind the pubis as well. And when it's full, it actually gets higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. And the uterus in females will also sit. The uterus also sits in females in this area right in here. Here's my left inguinal or iliac region. This is where the descending colon comes down to the bottom. So basically, we'll be talking more about what's in each of these regions, but these regions are important simply because what happens is they do help to define what structures are in the abdomen to help me, again, everything we've talked about today had to do something with location, okay? And basically that's what both the quadrants, less precise, regions, more precise are. And again, these regions, basically two longitudinal mid-clavicular lines, which middle portion of the clavicle on down, the mid portion of the clavicle will go here, go to the middle, straight down, and then that subcostal, horizontal subcostal line, which is the top line below the ribs, below the cartilage of the ribs on both sides, and then the transtubercular going from the anterior superior iliac spine on the right to the anterior superior iliac spine on the left. And it just helps me to define where things are a little bit better. It sort of isolates things in the abdominal cavity a little bit more than what I otherwise, would think about. Okay? And this is again just another view. This is that same cadaver, but we're going to draw it and put it into, instead of quadrants, let's put it into regions. There's my two mid-clavicular lines, okay? And let's do that. Let's do our subchondral, and let's look at the transtubercular line. Hey, we're in good shape. And again, you can see here's the appendix, or here's the gallbladder sitting right here. Here's the, let me do it this way So you can actually see, because I don't know if you can see that. Here's the liver sitting up in here again. Here's the gallbladder sitting right there. Here's the stomach sitting right in there. Here's the appendix sitting right there. And again, the intestine is somewhat variable. The intestines will move around a lot. Here's the transverse colon sitting right in here. Here's the descending colon. Here's the ascending colon. This whole area is the ascending colon. So you can see where it gives us a little bit better idea where things are. Okay. A lot of times when people are in the emergency room and they need to get a really quick x-ray because somebody has a gunshot wound or a stab wound, they'll say a gunshot wound to the let's see, the umbilical region or the right hypochondriac region or whatever the case may be. So it'll say where the particular point of interest would be in the abdomen. This is just looking at a radiograph the same way, and let's go ahead and do those lines. There's a midclavicular line, there's a midclavicular line. Yeah. Subcontinental, there you go. There we go, from transtubercular. This is the area right here, by the way. This is the area right here. There's a little bump that sits right there, a little right bump right there, which is basically the anterior superior iliac spine. Okay? And ASIS, like I talked about before. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So what we try to do in this video is a couple simple things. Number one, we try to describe the body in regards to planes and try to give you the importance of why planes are so significant to understand. They will lead you to a lot of good information later on, and they'll be very important in being able to understand things. If you understand the planes now and take some time to understand these planes, it'll make a lot of sense to you. Although there's three cardinal planes: the sagittal, mid-sagittal, frontal or coronal, and the transverse or axial, and they're all perpendicular to each other. X-rays are frequently taken on these cardinal planes, okay? On these cardinal planes. Sometimes if it's not, it's called an oblique plane, or something that's it's not on one of those planes. It's rotated around a little bit, okay? And that would be called an oblique plane. But I would go back and look at the x-rays just to make sure you understand how those x-rays relate to particular planes and how I'm imaging that, okay? Just sort of like if you were like a person who was able to see through the skin, what you'd see from that particular point of view. So the plane is one thing, and your point of image or your line of sight is going to be perpendicular to that particular image, okay? We also talked about the abdomen, dividing it up into planes, into quadrants as well as regions. And that just sort of helps to identify where certain things are inside the abdominal cavity. And hopefully this will be helpful for you and be a sort of like a foundation that's going to really help you to understand a lot of things we're going to be talking about as the semester goes on. If you don't understand these things, it's going to be difficult to understand a lot of things that are going to be falling down the pike. So hopefully this makes a little sense to you. If not, I'm always going to be available, so you can actually get a hold of me and email me, and we could talk about what you don't understand. Plus we'll be talking about these during our class sessions as well. Okay, so anyway, that's a little bit about planes as well as quadrants and regions. And we'll talk with the next one, we'll talk about some specific regional names on our next little video. Okay, for now, see you later.